Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Carolina Morning Meditations. I'm your host, Russ McCullough, coming to you live from sunny and 62-degree cool Mid Hill, North Carolina, right here in the heart of Carolina. And we're so happy you're here. We've just finished checking in with David Price and his program at 7 this morning, and then Kirk Sams and his sun drop uh, at 7:30, and so here we are, 7:45, and happy to be here. We're here as always to talk about making friends, keeping friends, and restoring friends for Jesus' sake. And we had a great Lord's Day yesterday. Hope you did. And we have been looking at the Gospel of John, the gospel of friendship, as we've been calling it, because John had a unique perspective, being the best friend of Christ while Christ was on the earth. John was very, very special to Christ. He was, of course, the only apostle at the foot of the cross as Christ died. He was the only apostle given charge of his mother. He was the only apostle that was given the right and the privilege to write the revelation of Jesus Christ. By historical means outside the Bible, we understand that John likely outlived all the other apostles, and he did not die a death of martyrdom, dying of natural causes. So very, very special man, and he wrote this gospel so very, very personable. And Jesus has been doing two things in the gospel so far. We're in John 9, but he's been reaching out to the outcast among outcasts, and he's been reaching out even to his enemies. And his purpose is to extend the friendship of God, to allow the hearts of many to turn back to God through Jesus Christ. It's his mission to seek and save that which is lost. And not all those who are lost are enemies. In fact, many of those who will be lost will be our dearest friends. But it is through friendship that we can make disciples, and that is what we're called to do, to make disciples, to baptize, and to teach all things whatsoever Christ has commanded us. He's commanded us in the Gospels. He's commanded us in the Acts. He's commanded us in the epistles, and he's commanded it in us in the Revelation. And so it is our right and privilege to be ministers of reconciliation. That's what we're doing. We're offering peace terms to the enemies of God so they can surrender and live. Because if they continue to fight, they will die, physically and spiritually. What a sad fate. That's totally unnecessary. So we are talking about Jesus as he is dealing with the man born blind who stood up for Jesus as his friend. And Jesus is now found him after seeking him, after his interrogation by the Pharisees, after he's been disowned by his parents, after he's been kicked out of the synagogue. He's a persona non grata in the society, and yet Jesus comes to identify to the man born blind the fact that he is indeed the Son of God. And the man born blind believes and worships Christ. People say, well, Jesus never really claimed to be divine in the New Testament. Well, that's rubbish. All throughout the Bible, those who were not divine refused worship. The angelic host that would come and minister to the saints of God throughout the Old Testament, if it wasn't Jesus himself, they always refused worship. But when Christ would come in pre-incarnate form, he accepted worship. And here we see Jesus accepting worship from the man born blind, sure proof that Christ claimed divinity in the Gospels. And so this has happened. And then he tells the man born blind of judgment. I have come into this world that those who do not see may see, and those who may be made blind. Now, we're going to start today with chapter 9, verse 40, as it continues this situation, this ongoing conversation, if you please, between Jesus and his mortal enemies, enemies who are plotting to kill him. They were trying to weaponize this man, this man born blind, in a way so they could use it as leverage to make a case against Christ to kill him. Didn't work. They were the ones who were condemned, not Christ, because of the faithfulness of the man born blind. So then, verse 40, beginning chapter 9, then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, are we blind also? That's a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question has the answer embedded in it. It's already known what the answer is, and the answer is yes. Hello, you're blind. You're blind as spiritual bats. Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no sin. If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains. They weren't blind physically. They were blind spiritually. They were blind. They could not see a thing spiritually because they rejected Christ. The man born blind, ironically, on the other side of the picture, was born blind, but Jesus gave him sight both physically and spiritually. The man born blind, the man cast out of the synagogue, the man abandoned by his parents, he could see Jesus as God, and nobody else could. These Pharisees were blind spiritually. And in chapter 10, verse 1, there's no break in the text, in the original text. This chapter break is artificial because the context of this particular passage began in verse 40, chapter 9. Now it continues in chapter 10, verse 1, the same conversation Jesus is having with these Pharisees. Most assuredly, I say to you, Pharisees, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of a stranger. Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. So we'll start with verse 7 tomorrow, John 10. We just finished at Archdale on Sunday mornings studying the 23rd Psalm, a little book. I forgot the name of the author now. Was written that we use as our study guide. A shepherd looks at the 23rd Psalm. And it was such an enlightening study regarding sheep. And Jesus here is talking about himself. He's talking about belief. and unbelief, and the ramifications to these Pharisees to which he is addressing. So they've just been told, they said it themselves, that they too themselves are blind. They were proud of their blindness. They didn't want to see. They were so blind as to plot the murder of Christ. So he says that there's only one way. There's only one way to enter into the sheepfold. The sheepfold here is the fold of God. And Jesus is the shepherd. Jesus is the door. Jesus is the sheepfold. And there's only one way to God, and that's through him. And if people try to get in any other way, such as these Pharisees were by their own good works, supposedly, they are thieves and robbers because they're trying to get in a different way. You don't, break into a building when you could walk through the door. It makes no sense, but this is what people try to do. They want to break into the sheepfold of God another way. When the door is wide open, you just have to walk through it, and that door is Jesus, and the sheepfold is Jesus. And it's so sad that people continue to try to get in another way, but there is no other way. There's only one way. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except by me. So you can't get in any other way. You have to come in through the door. And the door is open. And he's calling. He's calling you. He's calling me. He's calling these Pharisees. And the way that people enter into the sheepfold of Christ through the door is to hear his voice. Ignore the voice of the other shepherds that would take us to death. Hear the shepherd of life. Hear his voice. Follow him into the sheepfold of God. And so it's so very important that we understand that we have to hear the voice of the shepherd in order to enter into the door and enter into the sheepfold. We have to listen to Christ. And he says that the sheep won't listen to the voice of a stranger, but they'll run away. Sadly, most people listen to voices of strangers instead of listening to the voice of Christ. And when you listen to the voice of Christ, you can enter into the door. You can enter into the sheepfold and find safety, security, rest for your soul, and eternal bliss with God if you but enter the one way and hear the one voice to be in the one sheepfold of God. And it says that he used this illustration that they had no clue about what he's talking about. Why? Because their eyes were blind. They couldn't see. Their ears were stopped up. They couldn't hear. Because that's the choice that they made. And this is so very important as we understand that Jesus is reaching out in friendship to these enemies. He's calling them just like he called you and me and the man born blind to come into the one door by hearing the one voice so that we all could go into the one sheepfold and find salvation. That's why making, keeping, and restoring friends for Jesus is so very important, because we bring people so they can hear the voice of the shepherd. They can see the open door of the sheepfold, and they can obey the voice of the shepherd and enter into the sheepfold and find salvation. Most do not, but it is our duty, it is our opportunity, it is our privilege to be ministers of reconciliation, to bring peace terms to those who are at war, and as sheep, allow them to hear the voice of the shepherd so they can enter into the one door and take refuge in the one sheepfold. So I hope and pray that today, as we begin Monday, that you'll remember to make friends for Jesus, keep friends for Jesus, and restore friends for Jesus, because the sheepfold is not yet full. There's plenty of room for other friends to enter in. I hope you had a great Lord's Day yesterday. We certainly did at Archdale. And we're looking forward already to Wednesday, when we will have our midweek Bible study at 11. And then at 7, we'll have a deep dive Hebrews class at the Archdale building as well, for those who are working during the morning hours. And Tuesday evening, we'll be going to the Broad Street Church of Christ in Statesville for their gospel meeting. So remember them if you can go up there sometime between tonight and Wednesday night. That would be great. It's going to be a fantastic gospel meeting, I'm sure. We'll be back here tomorrow morning at 7:45, Lord willing, and with another edition of Carolina Morning Meditations. So remember that as well. We're always here, Lord willing, each and every morning, Monday through Friday. Remember, the 28th will be our next edition of Just Christians radio show right here. And remember the ministry needs of Dennis and Rachel Smith and family as they enter into the Tri-City Schools of Preaching in January. They have support needs. Just go on the website for Tri-Cities School of Preaching, and you'll find out what you need to do to support financially their needs. So until tomorrow, we bid you adieu, and God bless you in every way today as you make, keep, and restore friends for Jesus. Have a great day.